Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive! This week's discussion is the third in my three-part series on Magic and Shadowrun. I talk about the early 2070s to the early 2080s. In other words, I talk about 4th and 5th editions this week. This is when universal magic theory utterly changed the way magic worked in the setting. And with the rises of magic, new things started coming out, and old things started becoming more viable again. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we talk about Magic and Shadowrun. The development of universal magic theory utterly changed everything in the way magic worked. How universal magic theory worked was it realized that there was no actual difference between what a hermetic did and what a shaman did. It was just how they believed things worked. And as a result, things changed a lot. First, the biggest change is that totems stopped being called totems. They started being called mentor spirits. And where this really impacted things was a mentor spirit could be for a hermetic or a shaman or for any other tradition. Because that was the other thing that resulted out of universal magic theory. The various traditions stopped being subsets of hermetic or shamanic and started being considered their own things, the own architecture for the mentality for casting magic, for working magic. And it was viewed that they all worked differently, but the same. Each tradition had different spirits you could call. And each spirit became assigned a specific type of job it did. You got spirits for detection, spirits for healing, spirits for combat. And each tradition assigned each of these different spirit types a different role. Hermetics, had the 4 elemental spirits and then spirits of man. Shamans had plant, beast spirits, things like that. And each type worked differently. Each type of spirit had different things it could do. Now, as magic levels rose, you also had a new type of adept appear. Now, before this time, adepts were either they could summon spirits, they could cast spells, they were physical adepts who used magic through their body. And at some point before 2070, a new type of adept emerged, the so-called mystic adept. These adepts could access adept powers just like any other adept, any other physical adept. But they could also cast spells, summon spirits. In the early 2070s, how this worked was their magic levels were split between adept powers and spirit work, magic. However, by the 2080, things had changed. The change with this was they started being able to access their full magic and degrees of their adept powers. This is, of course, because magic levels have been rising constantly. Now, another thing that came out of universal magic theory was a significant change to how learning spells worked. As I mentioned in the previous video, previous to universal magic theory, it would be you wanted to be able to cast a Force 3 Fireball, you had to learn Fireball at Force 3. You could only cast it at Force 3. You could cast Force 1 Fireball if you learned a Force 1 Fireball. Well, with the development of universal magic theory, a realization came that you could, by changing the structure of spells slightly, you could create higher force versions of the same spell. To the point where you want to cast a Force 3 Fireball, you adjust the amount of energy you put into that Force 3 Fireball. And that became how magic worked. Of course, as mentioned previously, even before this time, changes had been made to fetishes and foci so that you could no longer cast a spell from the astral into the physical going through a focus. Unfortunately, this took away a lot of tactics for various magicians as these safety methods began being worked into everything. Of course, another thing that started coming about from universal magic theory is there became more traditions other than just voodoo that were what they call possession traditions. Traditions where the magician would summon a spirit into them. And in fact, for a while with universal magic theory, it was a case where magicians could more or less develop their own tradition. Of course, as time moved on, the existing traditions solidified more. But the big things with universal magic theory were that it broke traditions down into ones that were based on your force of personality, what we would call charisma traditions. Ones that were based on following precise logic and study and strengthening of your mind, what we would call logic traditions. And then the very few traditions that relied on instinct, reflex, guesswork, the intuition traditions. Shamanism was a charisma tradition, while Hermeticism was a logic tradition. Now, though, another side effect of this development was that anyone could have a totem or a mentor spirit. Mentor spirits, each one is seen as a archetype. And during these initial stages of the development of universal magic theory, if you followed a specific archetype, a specific mentor spirit, it mostly just gave bonuses to summoning certain types of spirits, as long as you followed a certain ethical restriction. This, of course, changed over time. By the time you reach 3080, following a totem gives you distinct benefits to skills, even. And, of course, one of the interesting things that came about as well was a difference in how magic affected the magicians casting a spell. You see, before universal magic theory, some spells had physical drain, some spells had stun drain. After universal magic theory was developed, all spells started with a stun drain. Now, this is probably because the mana levels had now reached a point where the magicians weren't having to channel as much energy through themselves to cast the spells. Weren't having to pull as much from them because the ambient mana levels had risen higher. But at the same time, there's also the fact that it was a case of the magicians, the spellcasters, were now able to have greater control over the magic that they were using, because universal magic theory developed the very ideas of how to control and manipulate the magic more effectively. Certain spells completely disappeared as a result of this, however. A notable spell was one called Hellblast. This used to be the most powerful area effect offensive spell there was. It was a spell that would almost certainly kill anyone hit by it. And would probably nearly kill the caster. But, you see, it was just a variation of Fireball. A souped up variation of Fireball that did physical drain, while Fireball did stun drain. But it would be classed as what they would now call an indirect combat spell. Because magic had changed slightly with universal magic theory. Fireball, lightning ball, Hellblast. Those were all spells where, in the old days, before universal magic theory, you would cast them and everyone hit by them would start combusting from the inside out. Post universal magic theory, it would be Fireball. You would create a literal rolling ball of fire at one specific point. And that would blast out, based on how much power you put into it, into the area. Very different. And unfortunately, by this point, the old form of Fireball ceased to exist. As such, so did Hellblast. But these are the initial changes caused by universal magic theory. And this was the early portion, up to 2074, 2076. And then things really start rolling. One change that occurred during this time period was it started being harder for magicians to summon spirits from the environment. And for the most part, a theory was developed that it was the initial stages of the awakening woke up a lot of these spirits, but then they went back to being dormant as time progressed. Until the Yellowstone event happened. There was a significant magical event that happened in Yellowstone that rippled out. And at some point, it started being possible once again to summon spirits based on the domain that you were in. Magicians that do this have to work for it. It's not something that just anyone can do. But it started being a thing again. But as we moved to the late 2070s into the 2080s, things again subtly changed with magic. This is when mentor spirits started having enough power from the mental construct of them to give bonuses to skills. But it's a bit more than just that. More than just things like that. More than the mentor spirits giving adepts extra powers. It's that the world continued evolving. New magics began coming into being. Somewhere during this time, something new was developed. Actual, honest to goodness, a new type of magical work was figured out. Alchemy. The imbuing of magic into single-use items. Now, these only hold potency for a period of time and then run out of it, but alchemy was something that didn't really exist before this period. And once this period hit, things changed. Alchemy's become very common among magicians just because it gives them the ability to cast a spell, deal with the drain, and then move out into the world so it's something that they have ready to use. It could be things like them casting items with high potency of improved reflexes or heal or armor. It could be things where they put high power into a fireball or a lightning ball and set those to go off on command. But that's really what they've done with magic. Alchemy, a whole new, rediscovered aspect of magic, has come back into the world. And then there are the blood crystal items. These are magical items, magical implants, eyes, heart, lungs, arms, that are a blood red crystal that function like a cyberlimb. But They're magical constructs, and if a mage gets them, he doesn't lose his magic. They can replace a damaged limb, a damaged eye, whatnot, and the magician doesn't lose magic, which is significant. At the same time, alchemy has developed rapidly. Alchemists with research have developed things like the Vault of Ages, where they can put magical items into, put their preparations into, and it stores them in such a way that they don't lose potency until they're taken out. Not something you would have expected from something totally new. I mean, seriously, it took almost 50 years to get Magic to the point where it was at the end of 3rd edition. To get it to the point where it was understood and known and predictable. To develop the universal magic theory from that point. And alchemy has just barreled down, getting rapid development into it. It wasn't there as of 2075, and then you get into the era of the 5th edition, and it's new. It's just started, and it is just developing in leaps and bounds. I look forward to seeing how alchemy develops in the future. It might even completely supplant standard spellcasting if it keeps developing like it is. But these are the main things going on with Magic in the 2070s to 2080. Who knows what we're going to see in future supplements, in future books, and in future editions. I look forward to seeing the evolution of the system. With that, I'm going to end this discussion. Next week is going to be a one-off on another niche, an old game product, Dark Conspiracy. I look forward to seeing you all then. And until then, I'd like you all to remember, have fun and keep gaming.